All right, in this video, we'll be looking at the female reproductive system, namely the anatomical portion, and then in the next video, we'll be looking at oogenesis, which is egg production, and then be looking at the female ovarian and menstrual cycle. So just a quick overview of the female reproductive anatomy. The main reproductive organ of the female is called the ovary. This is where eggs are produced. A lot of times you will see the more technical term of egg or ova or ovum. And the ovaries also secrete female hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And this acts with the uterus in order to not only produce eggs, but also facilitate the reception of the fetus. There is the internal and external genitalia, also concerning the sex organs, with the sole purpose of copulation and fertilization. So first, we'll look at the ovaries. The ovaries are paired structures that basically flank the uterus. And so here is the uterus, and here are the two ovaries, and these are the uterine tubes, are fallopian tubes, which we'll talk about momentarily. Ovaries are about twice the size of an almond. It's kind of the best way to think about them. They have kind of this outer cortex you can see here, and the outer cortex is what houses the forming of the gametes, and the inner medulla is what kind of has the blood vessels and the nervous connections. Inside the cortex are what are called ovarian follicles, which you can kind of see here. And a follicle is basically a structure that contains the immature egg, which is called an oocyte. And that pronunciation is funny, but it looks like oocyte, and some people will actually pronounce it oocyte. And then each month, a ripened follicle will eject that ovocyte or oocyte in a process called ovulation. And so we'll look a little bit at the female duct system as well. First, looking at the uterine tubes. So you can see here are the ovaries, and they're kind of suspended by all of these different ligaments here. And so the uterine tube, or what are often called the fallopian tubes, are not directly connected to the uterus. Instead, they're just kind of touching it. And so these tubes, basically their purpose is to receive the ovulated oocyte, and the tube is typically the site of fertilization. Each of the tubes are about 10 centimeters long, and they extend from the ovary into the uterus. There is something called an ectopic pregnancy or tubal pregnancy, and this is basically where the oocyte is fertilized in this tube. And usually this isn't a good thing. There is typically a spontaneous abortion of that fertilized egg by the body, but not always. And so there can be some severe kinds of complications that can arise in a tubal pregnancy. The uterus itself is a hollow, thick-walled, very muscular organ. Its function is to receive, retain, and nourish that fertilized ovum, which will develop into the fetus. Then the bottom portion of the uterus is called the cervix, and it is kind of a separation between the uterus and then the vagina, which is kind of the opening to the outside. The uterine wall has three layers to it. There is the outermost layer, which is part of that visceral peritoneum. We talked about that in the digestive system. Then there is the myometrium, which the myometrium is just all muscles, smooth muscles, because you can't control the contraction of your uterus. And then the inner lining is called the endometrium, which we will talk about the endometrium in a future video, because this is the lining of the uterus that is replaced each month. The fertilized egg will basically burrow into the endometrium and kind of reside there during development. And this endometrium changes in response to hormone cycles. Then there is the vagina, which is the female copulatory organ. It's a thin walled tube, typically 3 to 4 inches in length, and it functions as the birth canal, the passageway for menstrual flow, and the organ of copulation. And then lastly are the mammary glands. Mammary glands are present in both males and females, but only function for females. Basically, there's a point of development where males and females are anatomically similar. And then for males, there is a particular gene on the Y chromosome that activates. And once that activates, then the male and the female become anatomically different. So males have mammary glands because at one point in development, they were essentially anatomically the same. But for females, those mammary glands continue to develop, and their main function is milk production to nourish newborns. They are basically modified sweat glands, and they have 15 to 25 lobes, which is for milk production and giving the milk to the newborn. Just to mention an important concept here, I've talked about several kinds of preventative reproductive cancers, and breast cancer is one of those. It is invasive breast cancer is the most common malignancy in the world, and it is the second most common cause of cancer death in women. 13% of women will develop breast cancer in their lives. And so there are several risk factors that are associated with this. Some of those things, has to do with it's just a straight genetic thing, early onset menstruation or late menopause. If you don't have any pregnancies, or your first pregnancy is later in life, if you don't breastfeed, or you only have short periods of breastfeeding, or if you have a family history of breast cancer, all of these things can lead to possible breast cancer. But in general, there's only a small window there where these sorts of preventative measures can help. And so the big thing is it's just early detection. Basically when you become a certain age, you're more susceptible to those things. And so really in your early years, you should have regular checkups on that in order to prevent or catch early any signs of cancer.